In 1994, Acquire was founded in Tokyo, Japan. 4 years later, they released their first game, Tenchu, a stealth game for the original PlayStation, where you play as ninjas. They made a sequel and experienced moderate success before the release of the PlayStation 2. The first game for the new generation of consoles was Way of the Samurai. The game is set during 1878, as the samurai are slowly fading from relevance. You're a wandering ronin who's just trying to cross through a place called Rokotsu Pass, when you end up in a conflict between two larger clans, and uncover a conspiracy by the larger government at hand. But what makes this game unique is that you can do anything. Like, let's take this first encounter as an example. You'll see a girl being harassed by this gang. You can walk away and ignore it completely. You can watch them walk and get stopped by another samurai. You can join him and fight against the gang, or you can kill that samurai and help the gang out. You can stop them from the moment you see them. You can fight them, and if you start losing the battle, you can press the dialogue button and select the option to beg for mercy, in which case they'll mock you and tie you up on train tracks and leave you to die. But you can be saved by these people passing by. If you beat him, you can tell him to get lost, and if you don't, he'll ask you to join them because you're so strong. Let's say you defeat him and tell him to get lost. You can then talk to Suzu, who will offer you a meal as a thanks, or you can just leave her. It's entirely up to you, and this is just the first scenario in the game. It presents you with so many options, and there's dozens and dozens of situations like this throughout the whole game. Every person you talk to changes the story. You can attack and kill anyone. You can tackle situations however you want, but you only have one life. When you save the game, loading that save file will delete the save file, so you're only intended to have one life. It's so much fun, and doing a run only takes between 1 and 2 hours. It's obvious they want you to replay the game a lot. There's so many conversations to have, and you can talk at any time you're close to someone, and you can even talk shit during combat, which is fun. You can unlock different faces and outfits for your samurai, as well as 40 different swords and different stances that change the way combat feels. Speaking of combat, it's great. You can block, parry, kick, do light or heavy slashes, and the more you fight, the more combo moves you learn. You can also pick up and throw random items. If you walk backwards over a corpse, you'll fall over it, so you gotta watch your footing. Your sword also has a durability gauge. Every time you attack or block or do anything, it goes up a little bit, and if you don't watch it and it reaches the top and it fills the whole bar with red, your sword will take damage. And if it goes all the way down, then the sword will break and you'll have to get a new one. You can also get your sword fixed up or upgraded by Dojima, who is a smith. I also like that you can just leave the area if you want. If you just don't want to deal with the warring factions, or if you don't want to pick a side, if you don't want to protect Suzu and her grandfather, you can just walk away. The music and atmosphere in this game is just amazing. Just wandering through this field, vibing with the music and exploring the world feels so nice. It's a game that can be both calming and intense, and having the freedom to walk through this somewhat large interconnected world, just watching things happen, is cool. There's also a 2-player versus mode, which is a great feature for a game like this. You unlock more characters and stages as you keep playing the main story. You can also fight against the CPU if you want. The release we got outside of Japan is actually an upgraded version of the original Japanese release, which was simply called Samurai. The localized release included bug fixes and more weapons. Japan would eventually get that localized version there too, titled Samurai Kansenban. Kinda like what happened with Animal Crossing and Animal Forest Plus on the GameCube. The game was relatively successful and scored a lot of 7 out of 10s and higher. I think it's amazing, even though there's hardly any voice acting and it's a bit rough around the edges. I genuinely think it's a great experience that's super fun to replay. In 2003 we got the sequel, Way of the Samurai 2. It takes place a few years before the first game. It is fully voiced, but the localized versions only have English available, and the dub is not very good, which gets pretty distracting when you're trying to take the story seriously.
Watch where you're going, you little brat!
Then hurry up and do it.
What's this? What did you eat?
Ha! Well, the pain in my side was gone, so I got hungry. Well, I had 9 bean jam rice cakes.
Soup! You're supposed to eat soup, you fool!
You're again a wandering ronin, this time a starved and poor one, approaching the gates of a city before collapsing. Waking up, you've been fed by a small girl who then runs off. We find ourselves in a large city. This game is much of the same, but there are some key differences. First of all, this game is a bit longer than the last game, with most routes in the game taking over an in-game week to beat. But time only passes after resting or going through story beats. Here we're in the bustling city of Amahara, known for its trading, but the lords of the land are very traditional traditional and want to push their feudalism, while there's groups of people who oppose them, and like before, it's up to you to settle the conflict, if you even want to be a part of it at all. This game has a higher number of areas to explore compared to the first game, but the areas themselves are a lot smaller, and you don't organically traverse throughout the world here. When you leave an area, you get sent to a map screen where you choose where you want to go next, whereas the first game, you just actually travel there. I mean, yeah, there were loading screens in between areas, but still, you walked actively around the map. Here, you just kind of skip about, and like, it's not inherently worse, but I don't like it as much. I love the feeling of just wandering from an area to another and seeing what happened on my journey, but in this game, you're a lot more restricted. I do like that sleep and rest is a mechanic, so that's cool. If you just choose not to sleep, then you'll eventually pass out from it. In the first game, you only had to worry about eating to heal and taking care of your sword, but this game also has you get tired over time. Sadly though, this game drops the 2-player versus mode, which I think is a huge shame. I always love when games include it as a fun little extra, like the 2003 Ninja Turtles game or Revenge of the Sith. There are far more cutscenes in this game, and there's also a couple more endings than the last game, 10 in total. There's a total of 60 weapons to collect, which is 20 more than the last. And this game also lets you play as most of the NPCs in the game, even letting you play as characters from the first game. There's so many different events and smaller stories and different paths you can take. It takes a bit longer to play through a path in this game, but not by much. Both games are very short. They're intended to be replayed a lot, that's for sure. The combat is also slightly expanded upon here, adding more special moves and more ways to break people's guard. There's also some interesting drama between the different factions, and of course you can choose which side you want to go with or against. In some ways, it's a good step up from the first game, and I know some people prefer this game, but I much prefer the first. I feel the second is too restrictive. It's a lot of messing with menus and watching cutscenes. It feels a lot closer to playing a visual novel in a way, while the first felt more alive. Just wandering everywhere at my own pace felt so cool. The second game is also a lot more comedic than the first, which isn't a bad thing, but something about the vibe and the atmosphere of the first game is just on a different level. This game also tends to lock you into very lengthy dialogue sequences. In the first game, you can almost always just leave mid-conversation and people will get mad at you for it. Here, the game is a lot more dialogue focused, but unlike the first game, you can't just leave. If someone wants to show you something, your character just follows and you have no say until you're asked to. It's not inherently worse, it's just different. There's a lot of fun stuff going on and the game has more content overall, and it is a decent step up in terms of graphics. Though Way of the Samurai 2 is a good sequel and is still worth a try, I just didn't enjoy it as much as the first. 5 years later, we got Way of the Samurai 3 for the 360 and PS3, which takes place much earlier than the other two games. This is set during the Sengoku period, where many lords were fighting to take over Kyoto and attempted to become the new shogun. It was a time where there were a lot of ronin wandering around, because they had lost their lords, and there were wars happening non-stop all over the country. Before even starting the game, I want to show off how wild the customization is. You can unlock a bunch of faces and different outfits like before, and of course you can name your samurai like the other games, but here there's hundreds of weapons and a metric shit ton of customization items. You can equip 10 different items and choose where on your body the parts go. You can choose 4 different difficulties, including instant death mode, and this game is way longer than the last 2 games, and also has over 20 different endings. It's so much bigger in scope. This game also lets you select either Japanese or English voice acting, which is always a nice choice to get. The game has you waking up from a giant battle you just fought in. 2 men find you and try to see if you're okay, so I tell them to piss off, and when they start yapping at me, I pull out my fucking sword and chase the fuckers down. Or you could, you know, handle it like a normal person and try to talk to them, which will have your character pass out and wake up in a nearby village who has suffered a lot during the wars. And don't trust samurai. This game is a lot closer to the first one in that conversations happen during normal gameplay most of the time, so you can leave or pull out your sword whenever you want and people will react to your actions. It also sometimes gives you prompts during cutscenes where you can do other actions like begging. You can beg stores for free food and it'll lower their respect for you, but you know, they might give in and give you a discount. I love that they expand on what you can do during dialogue sequences and cutscenes. When you die in this game, you also get the choice of whether or not you want this to be the end of your journey, and then you'll get paid out whatever samurai points you've earned, which is how you unlock different stuff in the game, or do you want to reload the save and continue, which will boot you back to the menu and you continue from where you last saved. Which makes sense because this game is a lot longer. One thing I thought was funny was that after I saved this lady who was being harassed, I picked up some stuff they dropped, and then I realized I can loot their corpses like in Assassin's Creed, where you search their bodies for more loot. And the lady in the background was shocked that I would do such a dishonorable thing. The game allows you to be as evil as you want, and you can attack and kill all the civilians if you want to do that. But every time you steal from someone or hurt an innocent person, you will get minus points on your final score, which means you will unlock less stuff at the end of your run. While the first two games only passed time when you ran into any event that would continue the story in some way, or when you rested, this game is the first to have a day to night cycle that's going on its own. And it's cool, watching the villagers go about their day, closing up shop at certain hours, people come and go to sleep. You also get an empty house at the far end of the starting village, where you can stay. You get a bed and a closet to store your things. There is no time limit in this game, so there's nothing wrong with resting whenever you want and doing things at your own pace. You can do side quests, you can upgrade your sword, you can find people who will go on quests with you, either from paying them or if they're friends with you. One change I also thought is interesting is how people beg for mercy. In the first game, it stops gameplay and gives you a choice. In this game, they'll beg mid-combat, and if you sheathe your sword, they'll ask if you're letting them go. It's cool that you have to pay attention to what they're saying now, mid-fight. You can also have people beg for mercy, and when you sheathe your sword, they'll laugh at you for believing in them and try to attack you when you don't have your sword up. The one thing I miss from the first game is being able to talk trash mid-fight. It's not a huge deal as it didn't really lead to anything or seem to do much, but it was a neat feature to have. I start wandering across town, talking to some of the people along the way and just exploring. This game is so much larger than either game before. The areas are way bigger and it feels like I can just wander forever. I love it. The atmosphere is great. I mean, sure, people complained a bit about the graphics when it came out. It isn't the best looking game from 2008, but it looks really good. And this isn't exactly a massive franchise with a massive budget. I like the way it looks and I love exploring and just taking in the vibes. I spot this cat and I immediately want to pet it, but this fucking lunatic runs out and attacks me and scares off the cat. He starts shouting about flesh and blood. Fucking crazy, so I kill him, but the cat's gone. Also, you have to talk to this funny music man to save, and you can also kill him, but that's probably not a good idea because they don't come back. There are a bunch of these people around town, so if you kill one, it's not the end of the world, but I like the fact that they actually remain dead. Like the other games, there are factions fighting for control of an area, and you can choose to fight for or against whoever you want. There's so much tension in this story and so many interconnected threads to find. And at any point during the game, you can just fight whoever you're talking to. You can kill them if you want. Seeing the same story events from different contexts is just interesting and adds a lot to the replay value. I found the characters in this game to be really memorable, and the dialogue is so interesting. There's so many cool character moments I just really liked. And I like that the presence of Oda Nobunaga is such a big deal in this game. He was one of the great unifiers of Japan, and the local samurai lord is worried about his armies marching in and taking control over everything. And then of course there's the local Sakurai clan, who used to rule the city before the current samurai lord did, and they want to take him down. It's just such a fun story, I really enjoy it. You can also do jobs for people as well as some silly minigames like filleting fish or making mochi to earn some money. You could finish a run in the first two games in like an hour, but this game, it's more likely to take you at least 3, but probably closer to like 5, 6. And if you really want to do side quests and everything you can find, maybe even up to like 10 hours or so, you can spend as much time in this game as you want, really. There's so much to see and do, especially during your first go, and the fact that during any cutscene, during any situation, you'll always have the ability to pull out your sword and drastically change whatever is going on. You have so many options, you can always do anything, any character in the game can be killed at any point. It just makes everything feel so impactful, and I love it. And there's so much stuff to unlock, and like the previous game, you can also play as every NPC. How well you do in the game affects what stuff you unlock for your next run. Like the other games, it's meant to be replayed a lot. Like I said, there's over 20 endings, so there's a lot to do. Way of the Samurai 4 released in 2011 in Japan and 2012 internationally. It takes place during the last days of the shogunate, where you, like before, can choose to side with whichever factions you want. This game is probably the most popular and talked about in the series, but I gotta be honest, I don't vibe with it in the same way I did the others. I prefer the slower and more dramatic tone the games had before. There were some comedic elements and a few wacky characters, but it kept it fairly realistic. This game is quite the opposite, and that's not a bad thing. People love how goofy this game is. It goes all over the place and just has fun with itself. It gives me a kind of Yakuza vibe. This game has 10 different endings, so not as many as the previous, but that's fine. The endings are a bit more in depth in this one. It also carries over the same wealth of customization to unlock, as well as open areas to experience and wacky new minigames to try out. One weird change is that your actions in one playthrough can affect the next in unique ways. Like if you killed a lot of people in one playthrough, the guards will start hunting you down the next time you play the game. That's That's kind of weird. I don't like that personally. I want to replay to have a clean slate. Also, the game didn't let me play using borderless windowed, and normal window mode was really tiny for some reason, and full screen would sometimes crash the game when I alt-tab, and if it didn't crash it, it would reset the game's resolution to 720p. So yeah, the PC port here is a bit rough. This game goes back to the first two games' style of time progression, where it only happens once you progress the story, or rest, which is fine. You're not allowed to pull out your sword whenever you want. It's a lot closer to how the second game works, where it's a lot more focused on the cutscenes, though not as much this time around. I love that you sometimes get the option to interject during cutscenes with optional dialogue. That's a really fun feature. I'm also glad that you can talk shit during combat again, though accidentally I begged for mercy this one time instead and screwed myself over, but that's on me. I gotta say, the graphics have taken a nice step up for sure, and there's a good amount of areas to explore. I think it's a fun, unique game that does a really wild spin on the formula so far, but it just didn't grab me the same way the previous games did, so I didn't play it much. The story is also such a step down from the third game in my opinion. If you want something really goofy that gives you a lot of options, then sure, go for it, but it just doesn't feel as alive as the third game did, and the world is just a lot less believable. After the fourth game, a fifth was in the works but was sadly scrapped. Since then, the only new entry in the series we've gotten is Katana Kami, A Way of the Samurai story, and it's a sort of strange dungeon crawler, top-down hack and slash game. It has a lot of characters from the first Way of the Samurai. It seems like a decent spin-off, but I don't really have any interest in playing it since it's such a different game. And that's the whole franchise so far. There were two PSP ports of Way of the Samurai 1 and 2, but they were Japan exclusive, and I don't see any reason to play those over the original today, but they do both have fan translation mods out there if you're interested. I recommend sticking to the officially translated home console releases though, since they just look and play a bit better. I would love to get another installment in this series, and I know I'm not the only one. It's so unique and the choices feel like they really matter here, much more so than most Telltale games. And the way they want you to keep replaying and getting better, trying harder difficulties, unlocking and seeing all the sides of the story, it's really cool. I think these games are worth a try, with my personal favorite being the third game. And that's it. Thanks for watching.